Good morning, everyone. So this morning I'm going to read with you and for you the ninth song of Shivastotravali, which is entitled The Triumph of Freedom. And I've come to the conclusion that the titles on these songs are not actually connected to the song themselves, but rather suggestions related to the state of a practitioner who is established in devotion. When shall my heart anxiously longing for a new experience of tender devotion, abandon all else and come to you? Of you alone I am enamored, having as my only treasure the worship of your feet. When shall I make you visible, O Lord, before these very eyes? One of the subtexts that is not clearly articulated or really even discussed in the entire text, but is ever present there. And I've come to the conclusion that some of the rather dissonant things that he talk about are attempts to demonstrate the unbelievably and enduringly fickle nature of the human mind. He is demonstrating in himself, he's making fun of himself or being humorous about himself on the one hand, and talking about people in general on the other, and the nature of mind to constantly dance around, from a small amount of joy to a large amount of negativity and doubt and arrogance and egotism and foolishness. And in this sort of exposition of the nature of mind that is embedded in Shivastotravali, he never once attempts to call out, as we say in modern America, to call out or to criticize anybody who is demonstrating this completely ordinary, fickle, unbalanced, mostly negative state of mind. But rather instead, the whole text, the entire text, rather than being critical of anybody, is constantly focusing on devotion and the joy that is the simple joy, independent of everything. Right? You need nothing for the joy of this devotion except to engage in devotion itself. You don't need clothes, you don't need food, you don't need shelter. Nityananda certainly was a supreme demonstration of this, but in India, the whole culture of sadhus is to be beyond need. You don't need any of this. There's nothing you need except devotion itself. And so what he's doing here is telling us again and again and again and again not to engage in negativity, not to accept negativity from ourselves, not to accept that, but rather, in all states of mind that are not demonstrative of the vision and the simple joy of living a life in devotion to your highest self and the highest truth. To not accept anything less than that from yourself, and to continually, full awareness of your own state, to do everything that you need to do to bring yourself into alignment with your highest self. Remember, the speaker in this text is the individual mind, and the object of this text is the higher mind, the highest mind, which in fact is considered to be permeating the whole. Utpaladeva is with his Ishvara Pratyabhijna Karikas, is perhaps the first person that we know of in human history to argue forcefully that consciousness precedes all experience, including the experience of ourselves and extending outward to the experience of everything else. He is the first person to forcefully argue that we know of that consciousness is in fact the very nature of experience and the nature of the universe that rests in, the experience that we have. Because the universe rests in our experience. And so, he is over and over and over again saying that to appreciate, to come into alignment, to bring our lower self and our highest self into alignment, and to hold that alignment for the sake of seeing the truth, it is essential that we manage our mind and our emotions in order to penetrate the veil of mind and emotion and see into ourselves the very presence of the Lord that we are devoted to. A presence which is infinite and never not happening. And when our doubts and our fears and our negativities have been dissolved in the nectar of devotion, it is only then that we come into a clear understanding of the preeminence of consciousness and the role in Hinduism that all the other gods play, because these gods are really features of the cosmic process which rests in consciousness itself. So this text is about kindly, compassionately, lovingly, continuously, consistently bringing yourself into a state of positivity through choosing devotion instead of all the other things that you could possibly choose. And this text is also very astute in the way in which it is very gently dealing with this issue, not criticizing anybody at all, but gently dealing with this issue, because in handling it in the way that he does handle it, he is not in denial of the reality of the fickleness of the human mind and the duplicity that we are able to constantly engage in ourselves. He is not in any way in denial of the relentless doubt and fear and criticism and complaining that people engage in, but rather he is transcendent of all of that and reminding us, I mean, the whole text, all the 17 songs, the whole text is, in a way, over and over and over again, telling us, that rather than doubting and complaining and criticizing and in any way allowing our minds to go into negativity, devotion, which is the ultimate of spiritual practice. Devotion, as Utpaladeva is representing it here, is the very pentacle of spiritual practice. It is why we do asana. It is why we practice meditation. It is why we do pujas. It is the essence of all practice, devotion. Engaging in the practices that we need to engage in, engaging in work in the world as an expression of our devotion, engaging in yoga and meditation and dietary awareness and every kind of activity that pulls our mind within. We are constantly engaged in all of the processes that we need to engage in order to reach that pentacle, that highest state of spiritual awareness, in which he goes on to say, when shall my mind indifferent to all else through love's intensity, tear open the great door latch with a loud bang and finally arrive in your presence. Through the power of your devotion, O Lord, when shall I overcome all the gods who reside in my heart, the core of consciousness? In other words there, as I mentioned earlier, he is saying, when shall I see into the core of all of the life processes that I'm a part of and are a part of me? When shall I see into the core of it and realize that only consciousness actually exists? I've been reading an interesting book. It's called Notes on Complexity. It's complex. And in this book, the author, who is a biologist and an expert in stem cells, I believe, talks about boundaries and scale. And basically, he's saying, that from the point of view of a human being, we have boundaries. We have, our skin is our boundary. But if you look deeper and deeper at the situation, as you look deeper, the boundaries completely disappear. And even in an ordinary life circumstance, he's pointing out that the bacteria that live on our skin, that keeps our skin from drying and cracking and cracking open and becoming vulnerable to infection, that bacteria is a bacteria that in fact lives around us. It lives on our skin, but it lives in a cloud around us. And it lives in a cloud around us, that we share with the people with whom we spend our lives. And so their bacteria is our bacteria, and everybody who comes into our environment is participating in the same bacteria. And not only that, that the skin cells that we slough, that everyone sloughs, participate in the same environment, and everybody is breathing in everybody else's is dead tissue and absorbing part of their biochemistry. And in fact, when you look at it deeply, cells, cellular walls, cells cooperate and look a lot like individual humans, but even on a cellular level, you can see deeply into the fact that cell walls, don't actually, they appear as features of the fluid mechanisms that are present in the human body. And you can argue, on the one hand, that humans are colonies of cells. You can also argue, on another hand, that human beings are expressions of fluid dynamics that are present in the entire atmosphere. You can further argue that human beings are, magnetic, fields, and with, flowing fields of electricity. In any case, my point is here that the gods of India, all the gods of India, at whatever level of history you want to look at, really are expressions of the elements of dynamic process and dynamic system that are us, and equally so, they are the world we live in. The gods are an attempt to express the systemic nature of the universe on a cosmic scale, putting consciousness at the forefront, and the cyclical dynamics next, and all of it being characterized as divine activity. Again, encouraging us, compelling us in a way, to see everything in a positive light and to manage all the doubt and fear, anxiety and negativity that arises in us and overwhelms us constantly. And Utpaladeva is never criticizing us for being overwhelmed by the uncertainty and the anxiety that uncertainty provokes. But rather, he is saying again and again and again and again and again to, and I know you've never heard this before, to dissolve our minds into our hearts opening our hearts and finding the flow of simple, good feeling that at the end of the day reveals, the nature of our lives to be nothing more than, and I'm going to use a word here that Utpaladeva doesn't use. I'm going to say love. I don't think love is a word that has any currency at all in India. I don't really see, people don't marry for love. In fact, love marriages, the term love marriage is generally speaking even today in many circles in India, but historically is a very negative term. So, but love, as I understand it, what the word means to me is the infinitely accepting, infinitely embracing, infinitely nourishing and supportive and healing presence that is the very nature of our highest self. Always encompassing, always flowing, always giving, never diminished ever in the process of giving, always healing, supporting, embracing. This is love. And that is the nature of the highest self that Utpaladeva is urging us to establish ourselves in alignment with, so that, and in so doing, we become completely overcome by the experience of a profound and yet simple, very good feeling, which we can find ever present in the essence of our heart. And this good feeling dissolves trauma, it dissolves tension, it dissolves anxiety, and it establishes us firmly in the clarity of our recognition of the ultimate reality that is this life, beyond mind, beyond emotion. When shall I enjoy the bounteous celebration of the rapture of devotion, where the elements of the objective world, of the elements of the process, which are in fact the deities of Hinduism, become filled with the bliss of consciousness? When shall that moment come, O Lord, when all of a sudden I recognize you? He's referencing instantaneous enlightenment there. I have been asked about, whether enlightenment is instantaneous or gradual, because this is a discussion that happens more in Buddhism than in uh, in Hinduism. I don't like the word Hinduism, but I guess I have to use it. Well, it's not really, there's nothing really that's Hinduism. And Hinduism is a modern invention. It's something now that the BJP, the Indian politicians, are working hard to invent. But, prior to the Muslim and then the British incursions in India, there was no such thing as Hinduism. There were multiple schools of spiritual tradition, and who each had their own unique philosophy. So, here he's referencing, all the other religious traditions that are present around him in India. But he's saying, When shall I recognize you, the fearless, exalted, whole, without cause, the one, indeed, to have veiled himself, and in so when shall I recognize him? And in so doing, will I make you ashamed? Now this is a very funny thing to say, but it again sort of causes me to remember how arrogant people can be. How arrogant. Will I make you ashamed if I see you completely naked? That's what he's saying. When will I see the total naked reality? And will you be ashamed? Probably not. But this is the nature of mind. Drunk on, well, I could say drunk on the Shakti, but drunk on the bliss of spiritual awakening. People often act like idiots. And Utpaladeva in this text is consistently not calling us out for the idiocy that we engage in. He is completely transcendent of our egoic processes, not even for a minute lingering on, the residue of any of it, but continuously calling us to over and over and over and over and over again find that simple place within ourselves and hold it long enough that an alignment between that simple place within ourselves and our very, very, very highest, finest inner self can be established, and we can begin to represent, the very finest that is available in life from within ourselves. When, O Lord, shall I become such a cherished devotee of yours that you will never consider it appropriate to run away from me? Whew. He's tripping. But I think, in a way, he must be laughing all the time he's writing this. Viewing all creatures as immersed in your worship, when shall I retain this vision and be flooded with this sweet and delightful nectar? When shall my yearning for devotion, the highest state of knowledge and the highest state of yoga, become fulfilled, O Lord? Vivekananda, who was a very significant figure in contemporary yoga. Vivekananda came to the United States at the end of the 19th century and participated in a big conference in Chicago, a Congress of World Religions. And there he gave a talk, which is an incredible talk. Vivekananda was the disciple of Ramakrishna, a very simple priest in a Kali temple in Dakshineshwar on the Ganges outside of Calcutta, who was extremely well known for making many miracles. And Vivekananda was his disciple and his successor in a way, although Vivekananda was not a priest. He was an attorney by training who became the head of an organization of monks. And he came to the United States and gave a talk at the Congress for World Religion that was in a very kind of positive way, extremely critical of Christianity and its arrogance. And many people in the audience at the convention responded to his talk and to his talks and presence there. And it, I think, was Vivekananda who gave rise to this interaction that he had with Christians in Chicago, gave rise to a movement within Christianity in the United States at the turn of the century, which is called New Thought Christianity. And one of the principal manifestations of this New Thought Christianity is Unity Church, which, at one point in time was all over the place. And they are now, almost without fail in decline. I think one of the nicest Unity churches that I've encountered is in Tustin, California. You'll remember that I did quite a lot of teaching there over the years. And, that community basically emerged out of, AA, and, has gone on to be a place where many different forms of new thought, of at least an attempt toward enlightened thinking are happening. But they struggle, as does, any of the traditions within the United States that attempt to transcend the dogmatic boundaries, and the doctrines, the dualistic doctrines that dominate the world that we live in, and perpetuate the relentless negativity that, has become a feature of contemporary culture. When shall my heart, when shall my yearning for devotion, the highest state of knowledge, the highest state of yoga, become fulfilled, O Lord? So I was saying that Vivekananda he wrote a series of books on yoga, in which he posits that there is, 4 forms of yoga: jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, karma yoga, and raja yoga. It is my contention that these books were in fact a great disservice to the understanding of yoga. And the reason I think that is because there is no yoga until all the forms of yoga are fused together. There is no separate jhana yoga. And when I was first introduced to yoga, I'd be wandering around wherever I was and meet people who would say, "Oh, I'm a jnana yogi," right? This was in Bloomington. We had jnana yogis, but we had Hare Krishnas floating through who were bhakti yogis. And, then there was Govind and I, who were karma yogis, working to establish a vegetarian community restaurant, or a vegetarian restaurant for the New Age community in Bloomington. We were doing karma yoga. And then there was, the Raja Yoga meditation, which hadn't quite presented itself in our field at that time, but came later. And the fact is that, it is necessary for all of these streams of human activity to come together and be present in balance for true yoga, which is contact, alignment, and flow, to be present and, fulfilled in the experience of divine bliss, which is the very essence of devotion. So even though Utpaladeva has written you know, a work that is so fine that it completely stands up today, a work on knowledge. And, you know, we don't know what kind of yoga, you know, where his engagement in yoga, in asana practice, and in all of the elements of yoga as it is defined, the yamas, the niyamas, the yada yada yada. We don't know where he was, you know, what that meant to him, but we do know that his attainment, his accomplishment is extraordinary. His intellect is very finely honed. And, you know, again and again and again, he is coming back to us. You know, an expression of the highest state of knowledge in India, and telling us that you know, devotion is the fulfillment of knowledge and yoga, and it is that which we should yearn for. And looping back, you know, focusing on the wish to grow, engaging in the intensely from within ourselves, wishing to grow, is, you know, and this is what Rudy taught me. You know, this wish to grow is the foundation of the experience of pure devotion, which is fulfilled in the state of bliss that is the opening and the unfolding of our own hearts, and our merging from that opening in our own hearts into the highest state of consciousness itself. When shall I become helplessly enraptured and reveal to everyone my joy, having suddenly obtained and firmly clasped the treasure of your most precious feet? And remember, sometimes it's talked about that the feet of the deity are on our head. You know, and that's a cultural thing in India. I mean, it was in that time period a cultural thing throughout most of the world. You know, everybody bowed to their elders and their superiors, and etc. I mean, if you walked into a, you know, the room of the chief of the wherever you lived, and you didn't bow, you probably instantly got your head cut off, considered disrespectful. But the imagery of the feet on top of the head is really just simply a way of talking about, you know, the process of aligning ourselves from our own individual small mind with, you know, that highest mind, which is Shiva himself, ever immersed in union with the goddess. And Shiva and the goddess are also a way of discussing dynamic process. It is a way of, the feet on the head is a way of talking about alignment. And so we are lifting up from our gut and our sacrum through our spine to our heart, and from our heart to encompassing our mind, and out the top of the head we are connecting with the finest resonance beyond the density of all manifestation, from our individual minds to highest mind. It is not that we're saying that God exists in the sky someplace. We are not saying that. We are saying that God is our own inner self, whose finest manifestation is available to us and whose highest intelligence is available to us through that connection that we have in the top of our head to the total environment in which we exist. Hence, you see in the diagrams the various chakras in the body, become completely aligned, and then the highest chakra is not in the head, it is 12 fingers above the head, and that location beyond our body and the magnetic field of our body connects us to a dimension of vibration, of resonance, beyond the various notes that comprise the body. We connect to the symphony of life itself, which is beyond this body and in a whole different octave. In case you didn't notice, I just referenced Ouspensky, who was a disciple of Gurdjieff, who talked about, the theory of octaves, which is not exactly, he talked about theory of eighths, and that's interesting. In Shakta Shaivism, the octave is 9. There are 9 notes, not 8 notes. And every ninth note is the beginning of a new octave, not every 8th note. Ta-da! So, the treasure of your most precious feet. When, O Lord, shall I possess your pure, far-reaching radiance, so that I never become sullied by the shadow of Maya? And so when he talks about shadow and Maya, certainly we are familiar with the word shadow. Shadow here is not a problem. It's just that we don't want to become entangled in it. And so becoming entangled in shadow and Maya, is really about, again, referring to the nature of mind and the whole way in which we either think well of ourselves or we don't think well of ourselves, and we're constantly getting entangled in arguments with ourselves about whether we're doing good or we're not doing good, or whatever we are. What he is saying here is that, let us, through our dedication to devotion, through our constancy in devotion, let us be as we are, without getting tangled up in the whole business of self-judgment. Let us come back again and again and again and again to our experience of and our effort to be in alignment through devotion. And let us not get tangled up in Maya and become and experience ourselves as darkened, as tense, as anxious, as depressed, because of all the whole process of self-judgment that we get engaged in. Skip that, even if you're doing it. And over and over and over again through the whole of the text, he is saying, people do this. He's saying people are a little crazy. And he's saying the pathway out of the insanity of this human life is through the process and the purity of devotion, which transcends our mind, and we can only come back to again and again and again and again and again to be free of the intrinsically dualizing, opinionizing, attitudizing, judgmentizing nature of the human mind. Pure, far-reaching radiance doesn't engage in judgment of self, doesn't engage in judgment of others. That pure, far-reaching radiance is simply what I've described to you as love. The Buddhists will call it compassion. Now love and compassion are terms that you will see in Buddhism, but early Buddhism did not talk about love either. Love isn't a word in South Asia. The earliest Buddhism didn't even talk about compassion. The earliest Buddhism said, stay away from people, become a hermit. The early Buddhist patriarchs, were hermits who depended on no one and lived in the forest or in the caves or in the mountains and engaged only in meditation. I saw another very interesting piece. I think I saw part of it this morning. I haven't looked at the whole thing, where a psychiatrist is giving a lecture in which he says the diagnosis, the manual for the diagnosis of psychiatric diseases is a wonderful fiction. None of those diseases can be proven to exist on their own. They are all only diagnosable when there are two or more people involved. And this is exactly what early Buddhism is saying. It's saying, if you're by yourself, then it doesn't matter how crazy you are, how drunk you are on the wine of devotion, because there's nobody there to judge you. There's no other. In our world today, that's quite difficult for a lot of reasons. There's so many people in the world now, it's really hard to get away. Everywhere we go, there are people. There's no place you can't go in India today where you don't see people walking on the road. I mean, no place. The highest mountains, the deepest jungle, there are people walking on the roads. They're everywhere. Here too, in America, it's hard to go places where you can be truly alone. So our culture doesn't exactly support the style of living that was available to the earliest practitioners of yoga. And that's okay. And Utpaladeva speaks to it as okay. It is not possible for us these days because of the climate that we live in, because of the culture that we live in. But it doesn't matter because devotion transcends geography, it transcends culture, it transcends psychology, even as it heals all conditions, every condition, conditions of body, mind, and soul, and makes available to us the highest abundance that is possible for a human being. Devotion is key. Having assimilated into myself this orb of the world, and free of all desires, when, O Lord, shall I become prominent in the community of your devotees? Isn't that funny? He wants recognition. Having dissolved myself into the whole of the world. When will I become famous? I think that's ridiculous. But it does speak to, part of the practice that underlies the work that he's doing here, because in the Krama tradition, which is very significant underpinning of Pratyabhijna, the Krama tradition, the Krama transmission, the worship of the cycle of Kalis is about absorbing the world into ourselves, absorbing all the energy of our life experience into ourselves, taking it in completely and deeply, and beginning to understand that we are ever and always in contact, alignment, and flow with the entire field of our experience, and there is never actually any real boundary which is present in this field between us and anything. Right? We are bringing in all energy through our senses. Everything we are bringing in, everything we are taking in, experiencing. We are making a part of us. At the same time as we are putting out stuff, actions and words and feelings and thoughts, we are putting out stuff what is constantly weaving us into the fabric of the world around us. And this process is a respiratory process. We're taking in and putting out, breathing in and breathing out, a respiratory process which, when looked at extremely carefully, is a process which is the nature of the field itself. And we begin in that state to understand that we're doing nothing. We're not doing any of this. And our struggle with all of it is really the struggle of our dying ego to, in some way or another, preserve itself, which is also not possible. It's a futile struggle that is resolved finally when we come into a state of understanding that allows us to just liberate ourselves into devotion, free of any pride. And then he goes on to say, of the pride in the world, you are the one cause. Bursting with the spirit of your devotion, when shall I attain the great pride? Now, that's probably a technical term within his world that I'm not sure what he's referring to. So I will leave it at that. But I would say that as long as we have a body, there's nothing that is to be actually proud of. Everybody has its problems. And as it ages, all those problems only get worse. And so, pride in any sense is just complete foolishness. Replete with all the objects embraced by Shri, when shall I comfortably take my rest at the pair of your soothing lotus feet? And in this case, Shri is the goddess of abundance. I think, the note here is the goddess of wealth, but wealth is a very superficial notion of abundance that is put to bed when we come into the experience of the deep joy available to us in our own heart, because all material wealth and all material comforts and all material anything related to this body are really only about having a glimpse of that joy. The alcohol, the music, the whatever, the vast residences and the all of the material accoutrements of vast residences, all have only to do with, in some way or another, relieving our distress at our experience in this world. And in and of it, and of course, it's all a failed circumstance, because there's no amount of anything, no amount of material, anything that can bring you joy, any lasting joy. Maybe for 5 minutes you are thrilled with your Ferrari or your 3,000-inch digital TV, but only for a minute, because it's instantly recognized as yet another source of unreasonable expense. And only devotion is the only activity that we can ever engage in which gives us back more energy than we put into it. Everything else is just a waste of energy. We are constantly putting out more than we could ever get back. It is abundance, Shri, the goddess, that is the very essence of devotion. The living presence of bliss that relieves us of our anxieties and our depressions and our distress, that we are focused on again and again and again and again and again. Every time we experience any kind of inadequacy on any level that gives rise to any anxiety, to come into a state of devotion is to surrender or release our anxiety and facilitate the space within us where bliss can unfold. He goes on to say, when shall I, flushed with the wine of devotion, reach the limits of joy in your worship, attaining the highest fulfillment? When shall I have the bliss of your touch, so that I stammer and lose my voice, choking on streams of blissful tears with petals of laughter abloom on my face? When will I behave like a drunken idiot, but not be? O Lord, when, O Lord, shall I shake off this habit of acting like a brutish person, so that I enjoy an attitude befitting your devotees? Having attained anima and all of the other powers, and having overcome all fear and distress, when shall I lose myself in the pastime of drinking that magical, life-giving draught? When, O Lord, shall my voice produce such a lament that your image flashes suddenly before my eyes? This speaks again to, we're coming back to, the notion of deeply cultivating a wish to grow within ourselves. And that wish to grow sucks out all of the insanity. It sucks out all of the energy from all of our tensions, which support all of our insanity. When shall we produce such an intense feeling of wanting to grow within ourselves that the intensity itself gives rise to a instantaneous vision of the ultimate reality? You know, this particular stanza, you know, brings to mind Kabir, an Indian poet from the Middle Ages, from the 15th century, who is writing in Benares and could very well have been deeply influenced by Utpaladeva, who precedes him by 500 years. You know, and he says, when you search for God, it is the intensity of your longing that does all the work. Look for me, and you will see a slave to that intensity. This is Kabir. It is the intense longing to grow that creates the inner environment. Well, of course, it's a turbulent environment, but it's a turbulent environment that absorbs all the energy of our boundaries and changes the whole structure of our nervous system, you know, and begins to make available to us an insight into ourselves that transcends the conditioning that we have developed, you know, as in our family and in our social circles and in our culture and on this planet. With my heart set tightly on embracing your lotus feet, wish to grow. When shall I behold you without any effort, in the form of being and non-being both? I think that, in fact, if you were, you know, I mean, in context, while he, I'm sure, accepts that many Shaiva sadhus do work themselves into a frenzy is not appropriate to the social and cultural circumstance that he is in, and it's also not appropriate to the audience that he is writing to. Because remember, this is high literature, and he is writing to a very learned audience, a royal court audience. And the learned audience he's writing to really only comprises about 1 or 2% of the population of Kashmir and of India at the time. The literacy rates in the world up until the 19th century is basically 2%. There was never a big, you know, a lot of people who could read in the world, which I think is one of the big reasons why Christianity was so successful. But he's writing to a very learned and literate audience, and so frenzy is not what he's referring to here. You know, there are Shaiva yogis who are living in cemeteries, you know, who are practicing some form of chud, who are dancing in the graveyards. There are Sufis. The Sufis actually live in graveyards. Originally, Sufis lived in graveyards. They lived around the tombs of their peers, the peer being their guru, is another word for guru. And the Sufis did their dances which they developed from watching Shaiva yogis dance in cemeteries doing chud, some form of it, a dance and a meditation. So I'm sure he's familiar with that, but it is not an appropriate behavior for these people. And one of the things he's doing here is writing to these people and saying that, you don't have to live in cemeteries and you don't have to engage in extreme ascetic practices or extreme, yogic activities at all. And you also don't have to be, extremely facile with the philosophical structure that he's putting forward, as the cosmic truth. What you do have to do is simply be present, in contact with your own mind and heart, flowing within yourself in alignment with your own super highest nature. And the experience of that alignment is a bliss which heals everything. It heals all of our, physical pathologies and all of our social pathologies and all of our psychological pathologies and all of our sense of inadequacy and all of our yearnings. It brings us into a place of supreme gratitude, which is bliss and the very essence of our existence. And you don't need to know anything else. For him, all this knowledge and all this culture, all these accoutrements of skulls and bones and black clothes and cemetery dwellings and everything, those accoutrements, all of the accoutrements of of philosophical learning and Brahmanical tradition and royal court, social activity, all of it is pretense. All of those things are fakery. Everything. It's all fakery. You don't need any of it. You don't need to live in a cemetery. You don't need to even shave your head or wear orange or, be anything except completely immersed in the simple good feeling that is the core of your heart. And you do that through the practice of devotion. Which encompasses all of yes, it's bhakti yoga, but no, it's not. It's more than bhakti yoga. It's all the yogas fused into one, which becomes, contact, alignment, and flow, and the bliss of that experience. Anybody else?
Respectfully, dear Swami, the question we want the answer to is the question on every stanza in the 9th song. When?
Yes. Now is the answer. Now. Right this very minute. Right now. Let's do that. Right now. And then, how does that happen? Relax your body. Relax your body. Relax your shoulders. Relax your arms. Relax your fingers. Relax your legs, your thighs, your calves, your feet. Relax. Feel your face. Relax your forehead. Relax your eyes. Relax your cheeks. Feel your jaw. Relax your jaw. Relax. In that state of relaxation, allow your mind to become quiet. Etc. and so forth. Right now. Any moment that you choose, it is possible. And, it's the mind that keeps dragging us away from, keeps fabricating curtains of light, indeed, but curtains that veil for us the true nature of our own reality, which is nothing but the bliss and the abundance of supreme consciousness. And all the things we do, the yoga, the meditation, the cold plunge, the weed cutting, the vegetable growing, the plant touring, everything we do is really done in devotion to that highest place from which all of these dazzling curtains of light have become expressed. That's what it's about. So, whenever you want is the answer to when. Over and over and over again, whenever you want. That's why we sit every day. That's why you do asana every day, to remind yourself. And whenever you do it, it's available to you without fail, whenever. And it's the not doing of contact, alignment, and flow in all the forms that we engage in that activity. It's the not doing of it that allows the insanity to be perpetuated. And in fact, increasingly activated. It's that now. It's that now. That now. And there are, in fact, moments. Somebody once asked me, when was the moment of my enlightenment? And as I think about it, the moment of my enlightenment was the moment I met Rudy. Honestly, in that moment that I met Rudy, I became completely enlightened. It took me about 15 years to realize that. And in that 15 years, there was a lot of shucking and jiving going on. So the answer to the question, is it this or is it that, is yes. And Abhinavagupta, you will remember, says, one of my favorite quotes of all times, who by degree will enter into infinity. He said, the full quote I think is, how and for whom can progress be made, and who by degree would enter into infinity? He's basically saying there is no spiritual progress. And you can't enter into infinity by degree because you are already there. And so, he's arguing for an instantaneous recognition. But appreciating at the same time that having that recognition saturate your cells takes some time. You know, it takes a time that is invented by the cells as an expression of their own limited nature. And so anybody that has a body and achieves a profound level of insight into their own nature, is a person who has spent the time engaging again and again and again and again in the process of devotion and or the elements that we need to pull together in order to engage in the process of devotion, the knowledge building and the yoga practice, and the service to the world. The four forms of yoga come together, and then we can slowly see beyond the top of the fence that is the fake boundary of our physical bodies, because we build the fences, but the land goes round and round. We put up fences on the earth, but the earth itself doesn't recognize our fence. And time doesn't respect our fence. The fence is fake. It's a pretense. So it takes time, but bringing ourselves again and again and again and again, over and over and over again, into the state of devotion, we are relieved of our phony story and established in the highest truth, which is not our truth, it is the truth. Okay, I think we can stop now, because the next sutra will take a whole hour and a half to engage. Thank you all for being here. That's always fun to do. It's always fun to be with you.